Hello and good afternoon, everybody. We are so excited to be here today to present welcoming, inclusive, and affirming classrooms for English learners. My name is Cherise Guerra, and I'll be sharing a little bit about ELRISE. My CO colleagues, Jennifer Ancheta Garcia, also known as Jenny, is a program coordinator, and Ashley Williams, program specialist, will be your presenters for this afternoon's session. The Sobrato Early Academic Language Model, also known as SEAL, has the mission to prepare all English learners in California to learn, thrive, and lead. We're excited to share strategies, tools, and resources as part of our collaboration with ELRISE. So many of you have probably seen this graphic before, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background. So ELRISE stands for English Learner Roadmap Implementation for Systemic Excellence, referring, of course, to the California English Learner Roadmap, adopted unanimously by the California State Board of Education in July 2017, just 3 short years ago. As new English learner policy for California, superseding Proposition 227, which had been the state's English learner policy for 20 years. Aspirational and comprehensive, the English Learner Roadmap consists of 4 principles that are to guide local programs, policies, instruction, and planning for English learners throughout California. It calls upon every educator, school, and district in the state to work towards enacting assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools that embrace the cultures and languages of our students, to provide meaningful access through the full curriculum through engaging and high-quality intellectual work, with sufficient scaffolds and supports for full English learner participation. And it calls upon our systems to provide the conditions to make such education possible. These principles are research-based and guide us to the best practices and are an important foundation for us as we work to strengthen English learner education. Even now, as we face challenges of how best to meet the needs of English learners during pandemic conditions and through distance learning. If you need more information about the roadmap, there are links in the chat to the roadmap policy itself and this infographic you can download. And we encourage you to check out the CDE website for additional materials. So if you take a moment to look at this slide, these are the goals for enacting the English Learner Roadmap. Today, we're going to be focusing on building skills and strategies for implementing evidence-based practices. And so as we move forward, we are looking to create welcoming, affirming, inclusive, and affirming classrooms. So over the course of the next 3 years, ELRISE is working in partnership with your County Office of Education and will be providing many opportunities and resources for professional learning, such as webinars, institutes, workshops for multiple roles, teachers, administrators, families, counselors on various topics related to implementing the English Learner Roadmap, such as integrated and designated ELD, building strong dual language programs, meeting the needs of long-term English learners, and many others, all meant to support you in implementing the California English Learner Roadmap. So at the end of today's presentation, we'll have a list of some more ELRISE offerings over the next month. And Jenny is going to begin our session. Jenny, take it away.
Thank you, Cherise. Welcome, everyone. We are so thrilled to be here with you all today. As Cherise mentioned, my name is Jenny, and on behalf of myself, my co-presenter Ashley, and the whole ELRISE team, we just want to say thank you for showing up to today's webinar. We know how valuable your time is right now and what's on your plate. And so we just want to thank you. You're either a few weeks into your start of your school year or you're just about to begin, but wherever you are in your journey, we just offer this to you. You are seen. Your impact matters and is immeasurable, and you're doing amazing things. And I don't know who needs to hear that right now, but that's the way that we're starting off this webinar. We recognize that you are all a wonderful group of dedicated educators willing to do just about anything for the success of your students. And so that's what today is. It is an opportunity for us to come together and to really think critically and purposefully about how to create those connections with our kids with a focus on equity and identity. And so here's our agenda. we are going to highlight some of the critical conditions for English learners in a distance learning setting as it relates to our topic, which is welcoming, affirming, and inclusive environments. And then we'll think about how to create and foster the conditions for self-awareness and social awareness, really like knowing who we are and building that community around being proud of who we are. And then we'll shine a light on effective practices. Just a little note, while we understand that other competencies are equally as important, we've chosen to critically rethink the way that we approach self-awareness and social awareness through an equity lens and how it relates to building meaningful relationships in community. We'd also like to point out that all the resources that we mention here today, including the PowerPoint and the recording of this session, will be shared in a separate email at the end of the session. So I'm sure you noticed all participants as you entered into the room were on mute, and that's just because there are many people currently with us, but we do want to hear from you. And so we invite you to use the chat function. Our colleague Adriana will be monitoring the chat and will be addressing anything that comes up for you, but we'll also be asking a few processing questions throughout. And I'm sure you are all aware by now how to use the chat function, as we've kind of been forced into this PD webinar meeting space. But for those who don't, it's the gray talk bubble labeled chat at the bottom of the screen. And one click of that will open up the dialog box. Just type in your comments, questions, or any of the responses to the prompts that we provide. So we're going to try the chat function right now and set some intentionality within ourselves, because we know how important that can be for us. The pandemic has really brought on these feelings of disconnect, and we might be second guessing ourselves. We might be all in survival mode. Some of us, though, might be looking at this time as an opportunity and really thriving off of this new challenge. What we do know is that we must pour into ourselves first so that we can then pour into others. And so we're going to ask you to set some intention here today that will carry you throughout your academic year. So take a look at the adjectives on the screen. You're going to choose one. What energy will you strive to embody for yourself and for your students this school year? So go ahead and type in the chat. I can see here Julie is committed to an empathetic energy. Marcy, caring and kind. Patricia, compassionate. Nicole is going to be hopeful. See, I knew we had a wonderful, dedicated group of teachers with us today. And so one thing that we ask you to consider is the adjective that you chose. Write it down somewhere, post it up, maybe somewhere you can see it every day as a daily reminder, and really try to live into that essence this year with everything that you do, not just for your students, but yourself. And so we set some intention within ourselves because there has been urgency this fall to center our practices around things like socio-emotional learning and relationship building and amplifying our students' voices. The pandemic is causing health and economic crises, which only amplifies what we've known all along, that there is a disproportionate impact on our historically underserved communities. So that, coupled with the compounding impacts of xenophobia and racial oppression for our English learners and our immigrant students and our students of color, really highlight the trauma and the stress that our young children and their families are enduring. Equally important, though, if not more important to point out, is that a child's trauma is not the only thing that defines them. I'm going to say that again. A child's trauma is not the only thing that defines them. They are so much more than that. They are joy and inquiry. They are laughter and experience. They are hope and aspirations. And that acknowledgement requires a shift in mindset to an assets-based view where we see the whole child and we draw upon the resiliency and the collective strengths of our students and their families. So then, knowing this context, what if we reimagine schooling? What if we reimagined it to be a place where we attend to the needs of the whole child first and provide spaces for them to support healing and resilience? What if we created the time and the space to elicit student voice and share who they are and how they're feeling, and then listen to them And I mean truly listen to them for understanding. What if we not just provided a culturally responsive classroom, but prioritized it with windows and mirrors and doors so that they can see themselves reflected and see out into the greater world? This pause and reimagining and reflecting has the potential to change a child's entire relationship and experience to schooling. And so it is out of that urgency that our 3 organizations representing ELRISE came together to compile research-based foundations or critical conditions we know to be effective for English learners in a distance learning setting. So we're going to be dropping the link in the chat of that document, but also know that it will be shared as a part of the resources that we share at the end of the session today. So there are 11 critical conditions, and you'll see there that there is a description of each of the conditions. It has the implications for distance learning and the strategies to support our English learners. So today, for our focus on inclusive and affirming and welcoming environments, we're going to highlight 3 of those. One is to invest in relationships and build community. The other is to affirm identity. And the last one is to make learning relevant. All of these critical conditions, especially these ones right here that we're going to be talking about today, are aligned and rooted in California's EL roadmap in both Principle 1, assets-oriented and needs-responsive schools, and also Principle 2, intellectual quality of instruction and meaningful access. We'll make sure to make those explicit connections on the next few slides to the EL roadmap. So we want to touch upon some core tenets of each of the 3 critical conditions so that you understand what the basis of the webinar is. So the first critical condition is to invest in relationships and build community, which you can see there directly aligns with Principle 1 from the EL roadmap. Our top priority is to build and maintain caring relationships. And those include the interaction between the student and the teacher, which we know obviously is the most essential element, but the partnership also between teacher and family, which is amplified as a greater component during this time of the pandemic and in distance learning. And then something that can be a little bit forgotten about is the student-to-student interaction. It can sometimes be an afterthought in distance learning, which we know is a crucial component in effective learning. We commit to and we create mechanisms for knowing our students and their families in terms of who they are, what they're experiencing, and what they need. And when we break down those walls and we develop those relationships, we then create those safe, affirming, inclusive communities that we all strive for. And knowing our English learners and the communities that we serve, we also emphasize collectivist cultural practices, which calls on the necessity for collaboration and interaction. And when we invest in relationships and build community, we create a powerful climate where English learners feel supported in developing language and leveraging their home language. The second critical condition is to affirm identity, which you can see there relates to Principle 1 and Principle 2. We are multifaceted, multi-layered. Our identities are fluid and flexible. And as teachers, we embrace all of our students' intersectional identities and we value how they approach the world. We also acknowledge that our identities grant us the complexity of privileges and or disadvantages, some more than others, and we reflect on those. And we also call upon and leverage our family's assets. They come to us with a wealth of knowledge, and we affirm their identity by leveraging what families have to offer: linguistic, familial, and social. Our last critical condition is make learning relevant, aligned with Principle 1 and 2. By making learning relevant, we seek to understand our students' realities and attend to their socio-emotional needs in the moment. It is so critical that we provide a curriculum in which students see themselves and their lives experiences reflected, and we provide a space for them to have dialogue and share who they are in whatever language level they have, maybe using a mix of languages to convey that meaning. A curriculum that is exploratory, that is reflective, that is inquiry-based and connected to what matters to them in their community is what motivates and engages our kids. Okay, so we've set that up for you. You'll see those 3 critical conditions threaded through everything that we discuss with you today. So here's a structure of how we're going to present information. It's designed from those critical conditions and the research around how to support our English learners. But first, we'll approach self-awareness through an equity and identity lens. We'll lay the groundwork for that, for knowing ourselves and being proud of ourselves and knowing what shapes our view of the world. We'll then take a look at ways to bring some of those aspects and practices to life, where we're fostering those relationships and we're making the learning relevant. We're also going to highlight social awareness as it relates to the appreciation of others and building community and social justice. Again, looking at it through an equity lens, and then we'll weave in some practices that really foster that social awareness. One thing that I do want to point out is that self-awareness and social awareness are not just a set of skills that we want adults and children to possess. It's about creating the conditions, the mindsets, the habits to be able to develop an inclusive climate and culture, and then model that. Okay, so I'm going to pass it off to Ashley, who will take us through the next piece.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Just as a reminder, even though Jenny just said it, my name is Ashley, and I'm really excited to get into this with you guys. So the first thing that we're going to do, as Jenny mentioned, our journey today is going to start with self-awareness. And more specifically, we're going to be taking a look at self-awareness through an equity lens. So in this section, we are going to take a deep dive into self-awareness. Now, in order to start doing that intentional work around self-awareness, we need to touch on a few things. We need to look at the teacher perspective. Given the current context, how are teachers feeling? How can we best ready ourselves to show up for our students in an authentic and rich way? We need to also focus our attention on how to create that foundation for a welcoming, inclusive, and affirming classroom, whether it be a brick and mortar classroom or a virtual classroom. And to not just create that environment, but how do we allow that environment to flourish? And finally, once we have an understanding of those two pieces, then we can really dive into what self-awareness is. So first off, we need to ensure that we understand that teacher perspective given our current context. Now, we've all been through a lot over the past 6 or 7 months, whether it be because of COVID or Black Lives Matter or the wildfires that are currently ravaging the state of California. And we all know those difficult emotions that we are experiencing and have been experiencing for so long now. So something that I want to do with you that I also think is good practice is to actually flip the script. How else might teachers be feeling that might be positive? Well, we might be feeling excited to see all those little faces on our screens. We might be inspired by some of the work that our colleagues are doing or by the resiliency of our students. We might be feeling eager to get started, to get to know our children and our families, courageous as we face unprecedented school years with unprecedented challenges, and hopeful that when we return to brick and mortar, hopefully we will have redefined what true culturally responsive teaching might look like. So what I want to do right now is take a moment to think back to the intentionality that you set with Jenny earlier in this presentation. And I want you to just take a moment to notice that intentionality, to just sit with it and feel the emotions that it evokes for you. Because the important piece here really is, how does it contribute to our students' learning in our classroom settings? Well, if as teachers, we are feeling positive and excited and inspired to be in our classrooms, then the more welcome and the safer our English learners will feel to actually learn. As such, it is important that we take some time then to put the oxygen masks on ourselves before we put the oxygen masks on our students. Now, we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that we are not feeling happy and excited 100% of the time. There is anxiety and there is a fear of the unknown that we are constantly grappling with, and it feels like it's changing minute to minute. But what we really should be doing during this time, and we encourage you to do this during this time, is to enhance and build upon those positive emotions that you are experiencing. But how do we do that? We've all heard about self-care, right? Right now, especially more than ever, we have heard the term self-care. But more specifically, have you ever stopped to think, what does authentic or genuine self-care look like, and how can I possibly approach it? Well, simply put, authentic self-care really means listening to yourself and being honest with ourselves about what it is that we truly need to re-energize and refuel, to really nurture those needs that we have. All of our needs, our spiritual, physical, mental, and emotional needs. We need to make sure they're being met, which means it ultimately looks like us being courageous, because oftentimes we need to set up some sort of a boundary to ensure that we do meet those needs. But it really means enjoying those things that make you feel re-energized, to make it habitual and to ensure that you are remaining true to yourself throughout the entire process. So on this next slide, you have some more examples of what self-care might look like, specifically from an educator's point of view. Maybe for you, getting outdoors or reading a book or hopping in the tub isn't exactly your thing, right? Maybe saying no and spending less time on social media right now is more of what you need. This slide is really just a reminder that you have that permission to make self-care all about you, all about when you need it, and all about how you need it. So a suggestion that we have for you that does not in any way lock you into any action items is to create some sort of a self-care plan that you can change every day, you can change every week, every month, minute to minute, whenever you need to change it to make it suit your needs. Really what it is just a way to remind yourself that you need to take care of yourself, to put your well-being back into your narrative intentionally and habitually. So for example, when I think about my week that I have coming up, I know that in order to take care of some of my physical well-being, I'm going to have to get outside at some point, whether it be through biking or taking a run. Maybe I'll do both. We'll see how my week turns out, but I'm thinking I'm going to need to do some of that. Socially, I'm a mother of young kids. I need to speak to another adult. That is not my husband. That is not a colleague. I love you, Jenny. And that is not someone in my family, right? So I'm thinking I'm probably going to set up some sort of a Zoom meeting with my best friend whose child just turned 1 month old. Now, one of the things that I do in terms of my spiritual well-being is I write in a gratitude journal every morning, and it just grounds me back in that positive space of the things that I'm thankful for. And in terms of emotionally, the one thing I forget all the time that I need to be more intentional about is to take those breaks when I need them, not to wait until later, but to take it in the moment when I need it. So I think what I'm going to start doing is when I close my computer at night, it's going to stay closed for the evening so that I can focus a little bit more on myself and maybe even open up some space to read a book, right? So something like that. So what I would like for you to do then is to just take a moment, roughly a minute, to identify for yourself an activity or two that would help take care of yourself, but really think about them in the context of those 4 realms: physical, social, spiritual, and emotional. You might not come up with an activity for each category, and that's okay. The goal is really to start putting that intentionality back into our lives. So write some of those activities down on a piece of paper, a Post-it note, open up a Word document, someplace where you will hopefully be able to see it and just keep reminding yourself. But just take about a minute or so to think of some of those activities that really refuel and pour back into yourself. And welcome back, everybody. It really was just an opportunity for you to just start thinking about yourself again, because let's just be honest, if we can't take care of ourselves, we can't possibly be expected to take care of our students and to pour into them the way that we know that they deserve. So now that we have taken some time to talk about that teacher perspective and about some of the things that we can do for ourselves, to really get this foundation set, let's dive into how we can create and begin the process of creating this foundation for welcoming, inclusive, and affirming environments. So one of the building blocks that we start with when we're trying to create this environment is social and emotional learning. And I'm sure that social emotional learning is something that we have heard of before, and for many of us is something that we are working on in our classrooms. So this slide is meant to just be a quick reminder about what SEL, social emotional learning, really is. And it's about supporting one another and supporting young people to care for themselves. It's about self-awareness and developing that capacity for self-awareness. It's about developing a vocabulary for our students, helping them be able to identify the emotions that they are feeling. But the biggest takeaway for social and emotional learning is about secure both the academics, but also throughout the entire school year. It really is the heartbeat of our classrooms. So part of social emotional learning then involves trauma-informed care, a new shift towards healing-centered engagement, and well-being. Now, trauma-informed care is the first piece, and it is absolutely instrumental in identifying the traumatic experiences and their effects and repercussions on the person or people who have experienced the trauma. What it runs the risk of doing, however, is viewing those who have experienced trauma as being defined by their worst experiences, almost like it's attempting to treat the clinical symptoms of their trauma. Healing-centered engagement takes into consideration the whole person and their resiliency. It believes in its core that young people are much more than the worst thing that has ever happened to them, and that their experiences, their skills, their knowledge, their traits and characteristics are things that are worthy of being built upon and should be enhanced. That these people are actors in their healing and in their well-being, which is ultimately a product of their environment. So we need to understand trauma, and we need to move into healing-centered engagement in order to attain well-being. And well-being is really the state of being happy and healthy and at peace and comfortable with your life and where you are in your life. Understanding trauma allows us to move towards the state of well-being, and healing-centered engagement also allows us to move to the same peace. Now, through all of this work, we must put at the center our students' cultural context and embed those culturally affirming practices and understandings. Otherwise, our social emotional learning work runs the risk of becoming another values-driven form of management. So this equity piece, that culture piece, really lies in critically evaluating how we are engaging with social emotional learning and how the specific core values of our SEL framework translates to our most marginalized students. Think about our ELs. Do we allow our students to present and discuss in their home language, to use a combination of languages to make themselves understood and to convey their meaning? Do we allow our students to be who they are unabashedly in class every day? So after the webinar, as we have already mentioned, you will have access to a bibliography in which you will actually find several articles that have informed much of our work. One is called When SEL is Used as Another Form of Policing. Another is called The Future of Healing, Shifting from Trauma-Informed Care to Healing-Centered Engagement. And the last is called Why We Can't Afford Whitewashed Social Emotional Learning. We hope that in all of your plethora of free time that you take a moment to look through these articles to just see a little bit of where some of our thinking has come from. So moving on to our next piece then, let's start to specifically take a look at what self-awareness is. In order to continue enhancing our well-being and to help our students do this work as well, we need to talk about what self-awareness is specifically as it relates to, as Jenny mentioned earlier, CASTLE. We cannot possibly reach that point of mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical well-being until we can identify the emotions that we are navigating consistently, have an accurate self-perception, the way that we view ourselves, so that we can recognize our strengths, so that we can develop our strengths further and eventually be able to advocate for ourselves in a way that nobody else can. We need to develop that self-confidence and develop our self-efficacy so that we understand that we are worthy of being here and that what we do matters. So this work starts with our students, but it continues on throughout their lives. It takes on many forms in our classrooms. But what I want to do now, since reading through the bullets on the slide gives you a pretty good idea about what self-awareness is to really take you through each bullet, spotlighting a practice or a strategy that you could use to help bring each piece to life. And as we move through this piece, I hope that you'll see how our critical conditions 1 through 3 are being addressed throughout. So here we are. I'm going to guide us then through some self-awareness strategies and practices, but a couple of things that I want to highlight for you. We have for you 6 strategies and practices specifically that I am going to be discussing with you, that I'm going to be spotlighting as they relate back to self-awareness. But I want to make something very clear. You could very easily use any one of these strategies and practices to elevate any aspect of self-awareness. The key really is in the intentionality and purpose that drives your strategy. So what we're going to do, like I mentioned, is I'm going to show you how to take these strategies and leverage them for those self-awareness pieces. But please remember that they are not solely tied to one piece for whichever aspect of self-awareness you need. Again, at the end of the webinar, you will have access to strategy write-ups for all of the strategies that are being presented here on this slide so that you can, at your leisure, read through them, understand the intricacies of them, and implement them in your classroom if and when you see fit. Okay, so we know then that in order to move forward with this sort of work, we need to have a clear vision of what that goal really is. And in this case, our goal is to raise self-awareness as a capacity within our students. So what better place to start then with our strategies and practices than to start with one that really helps to define what self-awareness is for our students in real, authentic time. So now this first strategy is known as the T-graph for social skills. It's a strategy that you can utilize in and throughout any aspect of our units to help bring to light all the pieces of self-awareness, as well as to explicitly teach what it is, to really call it out. While I'm not going to be diving into the mechanics of how you engage in a T-graph, there are several things that I would like to point out for you. First and foremost, this is an opportunity to explicitly define what self-awareness is with the class. Now on the slide, you'll see that there are 2 examples that were specifically made for self-awareness. One is a computer-generated example. Another one is a paper pen example. But what you'll notice for both of them is at the very top where self-awareness is written in a bubble, the term self-awareness itself has been defined. When you move into the T part of the T-graph, one side addresses what self-awareness looks like, while the other side addresses what self-awareness might sound like. These are all skills that you want to see happening in class, that you will see happening in class, that you want to ensure continue happening in class, and that you want to enhance throughout the day and throughout the unit. For this piece, you take student input on what these traits are, and you build upon them throughout the course of a unit or throughout the course of a year. You can keep coming back to self-awareness. A critical piece to this strategy is how you flip behaviors you see in class from a deficit-based view to an asset-based view. Everything written on these charts, if you can see right now, is written in that asset-based form. Even if what the child shared as something that could be, that self-awareness might look like or might sound like, even if what they shared is framed in the negative. For example, a child may have said on the side where it says, what does self-awareness sound like? A child might have said, it might sound like, I don't get it, which is a very negative way to view one's own understandings or misunderstandings. The teacher could then gently massage the child's response to write on the chart, which we know from brain research imprints on our students' brains, I want to understand this better. Can you explain how? Fill in the blank, which is a much more positive way, an asset-based way to gain understanding of something that you don't know. Now, what this really does for us is it implies that as the teacher, we need to be doing some intentional work, identifying which behaviors we would normally categorize as negative, and start to understand and figure out ways that we can then realize them in an asset-based fashion so that we are creating a more culturally responsive approach to teaching social skills. Again, after the webinar, you will have access to resources that will explain in much more detail how to engage and use and create a graph with your students. I wanted to highlight those pieces for you. Okay, so now what I want to do next is I want to bring you back to those self-awareness components, and we're going to, for the sake of ease, go in order, starting with identifying emotions. So this next strategy that I want to talk about then is called a community meeting. This is something that I'm sure many of you have heard of, many of you might be trying in your classrooms, but it's a wonderful strategy, an opportunity to connect with our students and to check in on their well-being and their needs to really ensure that their day and their environment feels welcoming, affirming, and inclusive of who they are and what they are experiencing in that moment. Now, a community meeting is ideally done once a week with a designated 10 to 20 minutes that's set aside for each community meeting. The most important piece to this community meeting is really understanding that this is an opportunity to help our students develop that rich, complex, precise language that is needed to identify and express our emotions. Along with that, you can use this time to develop and enhance those active listening skills and the capacity to respect one another throughout the entire meeting and beyond. So once you identify that intentionality for the community meetings, then it's time to start thinking about some of the activities that you could engage with to enhance your students' abilities to identify and express those feelings. So one of the things that we suggest you do is to communicate with families what the strategy is and how you intend to use it, because it will help to start create that family partnership and to keep our families in the loop regarding what's happening at school and in our classrooms. But you might use this time to engage in some of those socio-emotional learning activities. Feeling cards are a fantastic way to start teaching what those emotions are. You can use them to then talk about facial expressions, the facial expressions we make when we are experiencing certain emotions, so that we can start to identify it within ourselves. What does it feel like? What do I look like when I'm happy, sad, frustrated, anxious? We can read books about emotions during this time. This is a great time to also do some of those SEL check-ins. We're all in a virtual space right now, so that might mean that we're creating some sort of a bulletin board, be it a Google Slide or a Jamboard or a Pear Deck or a Padlet or a poll or one of the wonderful resources that you have at your disposal to allow students to anonymously respond to how they're feeling today. It's a great way to gauge how everybody's doing as a class as a whole, to see if there are any emotions that we need to address together. You can do personal check-ins as well that you send directly to students so that you and only you see how students are feeling, and you can help address some of that. Journal entries are another thing that you could be doing during these community meetings, another way to help our students express themselves. But through all of this is another opportunity for you to leverage that T-graph that we just talked about. This is a time when you can start reviewing some of those traits that you have already identified, start seeing it happening in your community meeting and praising it for happening. It's a time when you can add more traits that you want to see or enhance ones that are already on there and add layers to what that trait might look like. Again, after this webinar, you will have an opportunity to look through those strategy write-ups with more details and ideas on how you can incorporate these community meetings and some other activities that you might engage with during this time. So if we keep moving down that self-awareness list, the next one is an accurate self-perception. How does one see oneself? And is it a true representation of themselves? And we know that none of this work is really possible without understanding something called intersectional identities. Now, thousands of years ago, Aristotle effectively said it. He effectively expressed, knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And part of knowing oneself is understanding all of the different pieces, all of the different identities that make us who we are, intersectional identities. Now, this idea of intersectional identities was identified in 1989 by Kimberly Crenshaw as a theoretical framework that seeks to shine a light on how the different aspects of one's social and political identities overlap or intersect, and how they contribute to systems of both privilege and discrimination. So for us as educators, it's important that we understand that students come to us with many facets to their identities, and that part of our calling is to help our students recognize and celebrate their self-identified intersectionality. This allows them to develop an accurate self-perception, something they grow to understand and see as beautiful, intricate, detailed sets of identities. And while we might not, in the scope of just 1 year, have the honor of helping our students know or understand every aspect of their identities, they certainly exist and are worthy of being valued and affirmed. This is all about how our students self-identify. For example, being Italian is a huge part of who I am. I'm Italian, speaking Italian, embodying my Italianness. It's a piece of me that I just cannot deny and that I am extremely proud of. Growing up, my mother only spoke to me in Italian, my father in English. It was their way of ensuring that I grew up bilingual and bicultural. And it was expected of me to speak Italian at home. And my mother would go so far as to completely ignore my requests, be it for a snack, for help with my homework, to play with a friend, until I said it in Italian. So what this did is it actually helped me become very confident in my language, which in turn helped me become very confident in my culture, so much so that once I entered kindergarten and I was asked where I'm from, something that, our 5-year-olds ask each other all the time, I proudly replied in my very squeaky, shaky, shy voice, "I'm Italian." Well, what this 5-year-old meant, she actually ended up being my best friend, she was meaning to ask me where I lived, which was something that I couldn't quite master the pronunciation of yet, but instead what she got was my unabashed, proud, cultural, and linguistic answer, "I am Italian." So this work doesn't happen in a small span of time, but rather it's work that will continue throughout the school year and beyond in the school years to come as our students start to understand more and more about who they are. As such, Jenny is actually going to be talking about this a little bit more when we get into the social awareness piece, because as we hope you'll notice, these feed each other and they grow into each other. Now, these notions beautifully contribute to critical condition 1, which is investing in relationships and building communities. And the number 2, affirming identity, how important it is for us to recognize our students for who they are. So to illustrate this notion of intersectional identities and the power and the concrete influence that they have on our students, I want to show you a video of a beautiful lesson in action. This is Jackie. She is a teacher at Edenvale in the Oak Grove School District. Now, the majority of her population here are ELs, and there's a high rate of reclassification. Jackie was trained in PBL, and she started her SEAL journey just last year, but this self-recorded video was taken earlier this school year. In this video, you'll be able to see Jackie teaching a lesson from a unit on caring and conscious communities with her 6th grade students in a distance learning setting. But before she dives into the discussion about identities and how they pertain to us, she first redirects her students back to the guiding question for her unit. And her guiding question is, what does it mean to be a conscious, active community member right now? And you can see on the slide right here that she and her students had already done some really intentional work around the words conscious and community to try and start unpacking what that question really means. After reviewing that guiding question, she then brings them into a discussion about the question as it pertains to growing into a community member. She wanted to acknowledge that, especially given our current context, community members can act unfairly and unjustly. So what can we do if something unjust happens? She opened up the conversation to her students who typed their responses on the board that you see on your screen right now, and it served the purpose of giving her students that voice and a purpose within the lesson. It set that motivation for staying engaged in their lesson, and it allowed them to express themselves authentically. So she's already setting up that environment that's necessary for students to feel safe and affirmed. So in the video, this next piece to her lesson, you'll see her showing a video of a strategy that she filmed of herself called a draw and label that she prepared to start answering that guiding question. What I want you to really pay the closest attention to is how she set up her conversation with her students, how the environment was created, what kind of an environment she created, even though she's in a physically disconnected space, and that how it allowed her students to honestly and authentically answer her questions.
It's clear. We have a lot of strong feelings about what is fair and unfair in this class. And we're going to disagree a lot this year. But that's a good thing, because our opinions are formed by who we are, where we come from, and what we think. And part of becoming and growing as a conscious, active community member is learning how to speak with respect to those that disagree with us, to those that are different with us. So friends, I think we're ready for the first step in learning how to grow as conscious, active community members. So I'm going to literally draw the first step for us. And my friends, we like to call this step the mirrors step. I'm even going to draw a mirror for us. Because believe it or not, the first step in becoming an active, conscious community member is to love ourselves. Yeah, to love ourselves when we look in a mirror. And when we look in a mirror, it's you like what you see. And it's not just about liking your eyes or your nose or the texture of your hair. It's looking into a mirror and seeing your family. Looking into the mirror and seeing your ancestors, your culture, your language. And if you can look into a mirror and love that, that's what we need you to do, to be proud and happy. So first step. Mirrors. And it's all about self-love and knowledge about yourself, a little bit about that self-awareness. Self-love and knowledge. Now, friends, when I am referring to mirrors, I am referring to so much more than your physical reflection. I'm referring to so much more than what your eyes, your hair, your mouth look like. What I'm really referring to when I talk about mirrors is identity. Can you say that word with me? Identity.
Identity.
You might identify as so many things. You could identify as a girl. You could identify as an activist, a speaker of Spanish, a part of your family. You could identify as Black. And some of these identities you have choice over. These identities are chosen by your hobbies and your interests. Some of you have been telling me that you're an artist, you're soccer players, you're gamers. These are identities you get to choose. But some of our identities have been created by society and you don't have control over them. And what we call these are social identities. Can you see that with me?
Social identities.
Social identities.
Social identities.
Yeah. And
I only heard 3 people say that with me. Come on, friends. Let's say that again all together.
Some of our identities
Social
have been created by society, and you don't have control over them. And what we call these are social identities.
Social identities.
Social
Much better. Thank you.
Yeah. And social identities is the you that relates to other people in society. So not the you for your hobbies and interests, but the you that relates to other people in our community. Our social identities can be broken up into categories or groups, and they're not always our choice. Others might place you in a category that you don't agree with. Social identities, they're complicated. And sometimes they can help us see and understand ourselves. And other times, they can also impact how other people treat you. So what are these social identities? What are these categories?
Before we move on, who can tell me the difference between an identity and a social identity? What did we just learn? What is a social identity?
Can I go?
Yes, Kino, let's hear it.
So the difference between them is an identity is who you actually are, and a social identity is what the society has implemented on you for you to be, like a placed role, like it's your destiny, and they force you to be like that. Like say you're lower class, and you just have no money or no extra money to do much, and then if you have kids, they'll be classified as from like the other kids. They'll be bullied a lot more just due to what society puts on them because of their parents.
Tino, I am so impressed with where your mind is going. It is so clear you are with us. Thank you for that explanation. Sometimes it helps to hear a second person say it so that we can understand it even more. Thank you for that.
That's probably my 10th time watching that video, and every time I can't help but choke up a little bit when he gives his answer. But what this video really does, it's a truly beautiful example of how this teacher created, not just in this lesson, but in setting up her classroom environment in general, the space for her students to provide authentic and rich responses and conversations to those questions, those hard and difficult questions that she's posing. I mean, she brought to life the very deep and complex notion of social identities with her 6th graders in such a way that her students were able to connect to it, to make connections to their lives given the current context. This lesson set the groundwork for her to continue strengthening what they already know and learn from one another about how to be active, conscious community members, starting with themselves first. We also know how important it is to develop a deep, lasting relationship with the families that are in our classrooms. And so a key way to making these relationships move past that superficial and dive a little bit deeper into the rich and the complex is to get to know the many intersectional identities that are within our families as well. An easy, low-stakes way to start building these relationships is to conduct something that we call family interviews. Now, we say low stakes because while we have a set of interview questions that, again, you'll have access to at the end of the webinar that you can pull from, there's no requirement to ask them all or to even ask the ones we have provided for you. It's just an opportunity, and we certainly don't expect you to ask all of these questions in one sitting. Right? So you can pick and choose from these questions, modify them, change them to fit your needs and to fit your classroom. But just like the rest of our practices, we do encourage you to modify them as you need so that you can address those different aspects of self-awareness. An important piece here in affirming and welcoming students' identities is really to allow our students to share their home interviews in their home language. Language is so much more than just the tongue you speak, right? We know this. Language is about how you think. It's how you emote. It's how you engage with other people. Offering the opportunity to share in one's home language allows our students to bring all of themselves to class, to celebrate a piece of them that others may or may not know about them, and regardless of which, to invite everybody in class to celebrate that identity with them. So we encourage you to allow as often as possible your students to really participate and share these activities in their home language. Okay. Now, as we move on down the list, we went from accurate self-perception now to recognizing strengths. Here we have an opportunity through something called an I am poem to give students a constructive chance to explore their identities with a template or a set of thinking stems to really get them started. If you take a look at the poems on the screen, if you can see them, hopefully you can, you'll hopefully be able to notice that everything is phrased in an assets-based point of view. It's all about the things that make our students smile, the things that they love, the things that excite them, their hopes and their dreams and their aspirations for the future. We have a template that has been translated into 5 languages that we will be sharing with you after the webinar that you can leverage to really address any one of those aspects of social or of self-awareness that you need. So change the stems, change the sentence frames as you need to help suit what you're looking for. We want you to be able to change it to be able to help your students identify their strengths in a very low affective, pretty fun way. Give them that opportunity to decorate it. Give them the opportunity to make it their own. Just remember, as with everything, intentionality is the key. An important piece here again in affirming our students' identities and welcoming all of them into our classrooms is once again to allow them to share their I am poems in their home language. Right? So what better way to say that we love and that we welcome our students and all of who they are than to allow them to bring that very intimate piece, their language and their culture, into school with them. So we do have it translated into 5 languages, but please translate it into an infinite number more as you need them for your classrooms. The next piece on here, moving on down the list then, is self-confidence. And self-confidence is one of those pieces that I am sure as teachers we are striving to help our students enhance and develop and bolster just about every second of every day. And a great activity and a great strategy that I am fairly confident many, if not most of you have used at one point or another in your classrooms is a self-portrait or a family portrait. But have we ever thought of them in terms of self-awareness? So this is another opportunity to have those courageous discussions with our students about who they are as individuals and to celebrate every intricate and beautiful piece of them. So how can we help our students enhance those pieces that they're already confident about and maybe give them the skills and the awareness and the appreciation to feel confident about the pieces that maybe in the past they didn't feel so confident about? What about the pieces of their families? How can we help them feel more confident about that? There is also so much to glean from a self-portrait and a family portrait. We know that oftentimes our students will illustrate details and aspects of their lives far before they're willing or able to write about them or talk about them. It's a great low-stakes way to start that conversation about our self-identified identities and to help bolster that self-confidence within our students. Now, moving on down the list once more, we have self-efficacy. And for those of you who might be new to the term self-efficacy, simply stated, it's this belief that you have what it takes to perform a task and that more importantly, that task matters. So how do we help our students build that capacity? Mindfulness is a great practice, and it's this practice of being aware of the space that you're in, both emotionally and physically, in the exact moment in time, and being accepting of what you're feeling without judgment. This often looks like just taking an opportunity to take a break. Notice whether you're clenching your jaw. Are you shrugging your shoulders? Are you balling your fists? And then maybe engaging in an activity that allows you to accept how you are feeling and to, when necessary and appropriate, take action to redirect yourself back towards a state of well-being and efficacy. It could mean simply just unclenching your jaws. It could mean relaxing and releasing your shoulders and releasing some tension in your hands. It could be just taking a break or a moment to realize that you really do have the skill set that you need to center and engage yourself in that task at hand. Grounding yourself in and acknowledging how you are feeling. And once more, the important piece that there is no judgment for you to feel the way that you're feeling. There are some mindfulness activities up on the screen for you, some of which I am sure you have heard of before. They can be used at any point in any situation to do some of this work. You have things from yoga to breathing visuals to dragon breathing to a body scan. Body scanning is when you feel an emotion and then you just take a moment to notice how it makes every piece of your body feel and releasing the tension when you need to. It also means mindfulness, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's going through your 5 senses and saying, I'm going to look for 5 things that I can see, 4 things that I can smell, 3 things I can touch, 2 things I can taste, and 1 thing I can hear, right? And going through that way and just grounding yourself back and being present in the moment. But don't be fooled. It is equally important, if not more important, to notice those moments of calm and happiness and peace and tranquility, and to really elevate it and celebrate it and engage in an activity that enhances that feeling and notice what got you there in the first place. It's about soaking in that moment, meditating on how you're feeling, taking that deep breath, and going with the flow. If we can engage in these mindfulness activities, it makes it so much easier for us to take a break from that stressfulness, from that idea that we cannot do what the task that is at hand, and really centering ourselves back in, yes, I can. I have the peace and the tranquility and the happiness, the strength inside of me to redirect myself towards this task, and it's an important one. So I want to take some time then to actually practice a mindfulness activity, and the way that we're going to do this is in a moment we will show you a video from a fantastic resource that I found called Mind Yeti. Some of you may have heard of it before. This was my first experience with it, and myself and my kids love Mind Yeti. It's a great resource that you can find on YouTube, which is even better, right? They have videos posted on there that you can access for free, and they cover a wide variety of mindfulness activity types. They are short, like 4 to 6 minute long videos that are also available for you to watch on YouTube in Spanish. So they have them both in English and in Spanish. So what we're going to do is we'll take a moment to just try one of these videos. This particular video is 4 minutes long, but I'm going to give you an option here. This is all about self-care and listening to ourselves. So take a moment now for some authentic self-care. Listen to what you really need and honestly decide, would you like to stay here and engage in this mindfulness activity for the next 4 minutes, or do you need to take some other personal break? Both are fantastic options for a break. And either way, we will see you back in roughly 4.5 minutes. But for those of you who are wanting to stay and do the activity, we are going to go on ahead and get started now. For those of you that need to take another break, we will see you back in about 4 minutes.
Hello, welcome to Mind Yeti. Today you will practice settling the hubbub by returning to your breath. Before we begin, take a moment to find your Yeti body. Sit comfortably with your back straight and your feet or legs resting on the floor. Feel how the floor or your chair supports you as you sit. Let your hands rest gently in your lap or on top of your legs. If you want to, you can close your eyes. Now focus your attention on your breath. You don't have to change your breath. Just notice it and feel it in your body. For the next few moments, try to keep your attention focused on your breath. If the hub bubbles pull your attention away, don't worry, just bring it back to your breath the best that you can. As you breathe, follow your breath as it moves in and out of your body. If the hub bubbles take your attention away, that's all right. It's normal. Just notice that your attention has wandered. Then bring it back to your breath as best you can. Let's try it again. Follow your breath as it moves in and out of your body. Let's reflect for a moment. How does your body feel? How does your mind feel? Notice if your mind and body feel a little calmer. Anytime you feel the hubbub bubbling up, just slow down and try to notice your breath. When you are ready, take one more breath and bring your attention back to the room.
All right. Welcome back from that mindfulness activity. I hope you benefited from that. I did. I actually was doing it. And so this next section that we're going to be talking about gets us into social awareness really through an equity lens. And so in order for us to create those conditions to support welcoming, inclusive, affirming classrooms, we're going to follow the same kind of structure that Ashley walked us through. So we'll begin talking about the teacher perspective. We'll discuss the overarching ideas of how to develop social awareness in the classroom. And then once we've laid the groundwork for that, we can then delve into what it actually looks like for students. And so I'm going to name this just to be very explicit with you all. We started with self-awareness because it's a developmental process. When we invest time on building and cultivating self-awareness, those life skills then translate into social awareness. And of course, don't get me wrong, it does take time. Children tend to be more egocentric, but it's going to take teachers lifting up this self-awareness piece so that kids can become more naturally self-aware. So those skills of self-awareness then translate into social awareness and having empathy and embracing our intersectional identities. And those in combination ultimately then lead to an increased engagement in building caring, conscious communities, the ones that we all strive for, right? Where students can embrace the differences that make us all unique and are better equipped to confront injustices because they are personally invested in their fellow community members. You can see here that all of this is rooted in equity and justice. So then, what does it actually look like for a teacher to foster those skills with their students? Well, it plays out in effective awareness. That means just paying attention to and tending to other people's emotions and feelings. So to better position ourselves and hold space for children, to be able to validate and respond to their needs and facilitate courageous conversations, so important that we strengthen our own social and emotional competencies first. And just like it is with our students, it's an ongoing journey. There's not one final state of effective awareness. But teachers who are effectively aware tend to manage stress better. They're able to steer situations in the classroom without it negatively impacting their students. And so when we hold space for students to be able to ask questions, first off, we allow ourselves grace, knowing that we don't have all the answers, and that's okay. But the other part of it is that we recognize that students are looking to us as models of how we respond. Effective awareness is having the skills to empathize, to actively listen, to name the emotion, to validate where they're coming from. We model how to interact with one another effectively and support our students in real time so that they can do that more naturally with each other. One other thing to say about teacher effective awareness is that language and messaging are everything. Students, especially those with a history of trauma, or our English learners that might be unable to fully comprehend or participate in a task, can respond or behave in different ways. So when a student, for example, expresses frustration, maybe because they can't access a task, it's too difficult and it's triggering, saying to them, I see you. I see that you're having a difficult time. Let me help you. Goes a very long way than saying something along the lines of, well, I explained it to you. That just tells me that you're not paying attention. I'm sure it's something that we've all heard. Unfortunately, something that we might have said at one point in our career. It's so important that we ease our students' stress with caring and reassuring responses, not punitive ones, and that what we offer to our students during this time of this current upheaval and every day thereafter is connection and safety. This quote holds so true. It says, I've come to a frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in the classroom. It's my personal approach that creates the climate. It's my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I possess a tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated, and a child humanized or dehumanized. Maybe some of you are familiar with this quote, but we're going to give you a moment to reflect. In the chat box, go ahead and type a word or phrase that resonated with you, or if you feel so inclined to share maybe a personal experience, we'd invite you to share that in the chat as well. Mercy says tremendous power. Susan, joyous. Mrs. Rodriguez, inspiration. Lynette, decisive element in the classroom, right? Such power in that. Here's the thing. Districts are becoming more aware and empathetic to pressures that teachers are facing. And so they may have provided or are planning to provide training on trauma-informed practices or healing-centered engagement strategies, maybe professional learning on developing empathy for the compounded levels of experiences that our English learners have. All to say, we encourage you to tap into the resources at your sites and at your district office that you might already have to do this meaningful work, or if not, advocate for yourself. Because again, it's the idea that we must pour into ourselves first to do this meaningful work with our students. So then, what really is social awareness? First of all, we can't really effectively talk about social awareness without talking about how it relates to identity and equity. You can see there that they're aligned to the 3 critical conditions for English learners. Developing skills of social awareness in a really deep way means that we examine how it relates to our intersectional identities. Remember, it's that recognition and the appreciation that we have layers of multifaceted identities that are fluid and flexible, and that the many pieces of us who shape who we are to be looked at as valuable and as assets. It's also the critical acknowledgement that some of those identities afford us privileges, while others can be the target of oppression and injustice. So for example, I am a daughter of Filipino immigrants. Believe it or not, I'm also considered darker skinned compared to what those in my culture and what other Asian cultures and even society deem beautiful, which is light skin. And as you know, this stems from our colonization. My family experiences anti-immigrant rhetoric for just looking the way that they look. Being born here in the United States, despite not having a Filipino accent, I have still been the target of that same rhetoric. I've received microaggressions all my life based on the color of my skin. I'm also a woman. Need I say more? On the same note, it's so important to point out that I'm also able-bodied. I'm cisgender. I'm educated. I'm middle class. And depending upon the context, I'm also a woman, which those provide me advantages too. And it's that kind of understanding of our identities and where they sit in either oppression and or disadvantage that allows us to foster and support that critical dialogue with our students on those social issues. So then, if we hope to create an environment where students feel welcomed and included and affirmed, embracing the whole child and their identities is crucial. When we choose to acknowledge one aspect of a student's identity but completely deny another aspect, and there could be many reasons for this, one being from our own unease, one could be from fear of addressing this because of what our families might say, or fear of not having the support of our admin, whatever the case may be. Again, there are many reasons. But when we deny pieces of their identity, we're sending messages to our students of who matters and who doesn't. We create environments where young children feel invisible, like parts of them don't belong. The Anti-Bias Education for Young Children says it better than I ever could. And they say that silence robs children of a vocabulary to talk about and or ask questions to gain clarity. It requires children to figure things out on their own based on their limited experience and knowledge of the world around them. It teaches fear, like, shush, let's not talk about it because it's not even safe for the adults to talk about. And it forces children to rely on sources such as other children and the media for information, which can oftentimes be inaccurate or biased. Remember, social awareness is having the emotional intelligence and that cultural competency to embrace, respect, and have empathy regardless of our layered intersectional identities. And so when we hold space for students and their stories and their experiences, we create those conditions to foster social awareness skills and in turn create social change and what we hope to be lasting change. So then what does visibility look like? Let's flip it to think about how visibility plays out for our students. Taking notice and lifting up identity means that it could boost confidence to ask questions and utilize the vocabulary learned because we're making the learning relevant. It allows students to respectfully communicate and engage in discourse. It teaches safety and inquiry. It provides opportunities to listen to diverse perspectives. So you can think of all the possibilities when we create and hold space for the whole child. So how does teaching social awareness translate for our students then? It could mean that we work on developing the skills of having an awareness of how our behaviors and moods affect others, similar to the power quote that we just reflected on in the chat. It could mean an awareness of how others are feeling, being able to read the world around them using visual and auditory cues. Like, I need to know that my classmate is feeling upset by their facial expressions or their body language or their tone of voice. It's understanding that there are varying degrees of emotions and that there are notable differences between feeling upset versus enraged. And it's having the ability to distinguish between points of view and perspective, knowing how to respond to somebody with empathy and being able to problem solve. Again, All of these result in our students building positive relationships with others, feeling safe in the classroom to be able to take risks, especially for our English learners, so that they can then commit to their academic success. Okay, so now that I've laid the foundation for social awareness and thinking through how to create those conditions, we're going to get into some practices. But again, I want to point out, while there are strategies and practices that help bring to life aspects of diversity and acknowledgement of intersectional identity, relegating social awareness to just one part of your day is not sufficient enough. The work permeates through everything that we do. Remember, it's about creating the habits and mindsets. So it shows up in our daily interactions with our students and their families. It shapes and guides how we approach our curriculum. And it causes us to be really critical about the kinds of books that we read aloud to our kids. So I just want to make sure to point that out first. But nonetheless, here are some activities or practices that you could do to bring this work to life. So you can see here, we're going to touch upon identity activities again, but this time with this notion of we are all the same and we are all different. We'll talk about collaboration and how crucial this piece is for our English learners. We'll bring it back to community meetings, but this time with a focus on social awareness. We'll talk about scaffolds to support interaction and the use of literature. So let's take a look at those identity activities. Remember the identity activities Ashley discussed earlier. So there's self-portraits, family portraits, I am me poems. There's plenty others out there. Easy activities that you could do to include mirrors and give them an opportunity to share who they are. But it's not just something that we do and then we're completely done. We want to revisit these and really think intentionally about how do we use these and what are we hoping to accomplish? Our goal is to create social awareness and build community. So we use identity activities to facilitate conversations, and we develop the vocabulary and language around similarities and differences. So Ashley mentioned earlier that after students create their identity activities that focus on self-awareness, then we want to hold space for them to share, of course, in the language that they feel most comfortable with. After all, a huge part of our identity is our language. But we want to take it one step further when we move into the social awareness space. This notion of we are all the same and we are all different makes it acceptable to talk about human differences, to not shush or silence their kids when they notice those differences. All of this promotes connection and empathy. So we want to encourage our students to identify similarities and differences by providing them with frames. We are similar because we have blank, and we are different in that we blank. And it makes visible and affirms that yes, there are differences and those differences are to be valued, and yes, there are similarities that connect us together. So again, when doing these identity activities, we just want to be intentional about how we approach it, either from a self-awareness aspect or a social awareness aspect. The next practice that we're going to touch on is collaboration. But before I begin, a little note about collectivist culture. As we're all aware now, distance learning has the potential to lead to isolation if we're not careful. Our students, though, particularly our English learners, thrive in community, a community that values interdependence, and it values this notion that their contributions that they have to offer are for the greater good of the whole group. It's how they negotiate and make sense of the world. It's how they build and use language. US schools, though, tend to emphasize individualism. We celebrate independence, we value individual achievement, but a teacher that understands both individualistic culture and collectivism is privy to our students' needs and values that they place on relationships. So with that said, we encourage you to think critically about how we design collaborative or interactive activities to support our English learners in developing oral language. Again, it can be easier in distance learning to not prioritize student-to-student interaction, but scaffolds like partnerships, small flexible grouping is needed. It's one of the ways that we can be culturally responsive. So I'm sure there are many, many activities, but here are just some activities that you could do to promote collaboration and interaction during distance learning. You could, it's the start of the school year, so you could co-construct norms and agreements. Maybe you could use slides that everybody has editing access to. You could do shared research or joint construction of text. Maybe after reading a book, you could co-write a response to it, or have the kids work in groups so that they could co-construct a story like the one shown here. You could do student-led community meetings. This is a wonderful opportunity for student agency. Sitting down with a small group and helping them to design an agenda so that they could critically think about the topics that they want to talk about with their peers because it's relevant to them is so powerful. And then helping them to facilitate discussion. Again, the more that we do it, the less teacher touch that we might have. And then identity activities, same and different, having them meet in small groups or partnerships to make those connections with one another. To be clear, balance of individualism and collectivism are needed. And when we nurture both, then we strengthen our students' self-worth and their individuality, but we also strengthen the ability to collaborate and work together as a community. So when you're designing collaborative activities, it's always beneficial for our practice and for our students to do some internal reflection. We have a set of reflection questions here. The first three are going to be around leveraging student voice. And so they are, how much learning is dedicated to direct instruction versus inquiry? How often are my students talking meaningfully about a topic? What's the teacher talk to student talk ratio there? Are students able to elaborate and build off of one another? The next two reflection questions help us think about student agency. So when I design opportunities for collaboration, do I provide roles for students to negotiate among themselves that play on their strengths? Are there opportunities for self-reflection and or peer feedback when it comes to the skills of collaboration so that my students can constantly improve? We're going to give you a little bit of time for reflection on a piece of paper or a Post-it note or even up on the screen. Take some time and really reflect on one of these questions. How are you amplifying student voice and student agency? So go ahead and take some time with that. So if you would like to sit with these reflection questions a little bit longer, just know that it is a part of the resources that we'll share with you at the end of the webinar. So our next practice is one that Ashley mentioned around community meetings in the way of self-awareness, but we're circling back to it as it relates to social awareness. This collaborative practice has the potential to transform classroom culture from individual students to actual teammates. But again, like with everything that we do, intentionality is key here when we're approaching any of these. What are we hoping to accomplish is what we need to ask ourselves. If we want to work on social awareness and developing emotional intelligence, then we could center our community meetings around things like, how do we recognize our classmates' emotions? How do we empathize? What does that even look like and how do we do it? Let's get to understand and know what cause and effect is. Kalani is very upset because someone made fun of his name. We could really focus on developing language like the wide range of emotions from happy or joyous or ecstatic and provide frames for them to respond to how other people are feeling. Again, community meetings are this wonderful space where students learn how to nurture their relationships, which is a skill that takes them into adulthood. In community meetings or in any setting where we're asking them to collaborate with one another, so important to provide them scaffolds to support interaction. The California ELA-ELD framework refers to these as academic language stems, and they don't come naturally for our English learners or our young children, so it's important that we provide them with that support to interact with their peers. Leveraging the T-graph is huge. So remember Ashley talked about the what does it look like and what does it sound like column? The what does it sound like column is a place where we can explicitly give students effective phrases that they can then use in the class. So Some of those speaking and listening standards can include, but are not limited to just these, but they could include initiating a topic, elaborating or clarifying on an idea, building on somebody's ideas, paraphrasing or summarizing. You could also teach your kids how to agree and disagree productively and respectfully, or even resolve conflict. If we want to build competency, we explicitly teach and model how to use these frames. We provide a ton of opportunities to practice so that they can build and use the language that they just learned from you. And we highlight and make it a big deal when we hear our students using that collaborative language so that they'll feel encouraged to use it even more. And our last practice for today's webinar is the use of literature to promote social awareness. Adichie eloquently states, anytime books are used in classroom, they are teaching children about who is and who is not important, valued, real, whose story matters. There's so much power in literature. There's validation and confirmation of whose stories matter. We make effective use of literature and the topics and the characters and their struggle and their joy so that students become self-aware of who they are because they see themselves reflected in the characters, and they become socially aware about their peers in the world around them. So there's a wide range of books out there right now with authors more conscious of identity than ever. That and the readily available access to read-alouds on the internet, building an inclusive library is a little bit easier in the 21st century than it was ever before. When growing up and trying to find my place in the world and among my peers, there were literally no books that looked like me. So representation and visibility matter. And as if we even have to justify it, it's written into the California ELA/ELD framework where we have to address identities and experiences. So when you're going through your library, just take inventory and think critically, who is represented, who is telling the story, whose story is being told and whose isn't, and does it represent a wide range of experiences, or is it just one portrayal, the struggle or the stereotype? We've curated a list of our favorite beautifully written picture books that normalize aspects of identity, and that list will be provided in the resources that we share. Remember, it's not just about diversifying our library, it's about having the rich conversations and the work that you do to meaningfully engage with text with your students. So one beautiful example is in Jackie's classroom and how she leveraged literature, which is a poem, in this case a poem, to begin dialogue on similarities and differences. So this is a video that she shared with her students first of an author, Mahogany Brown, reading her poem, The Ability to Be. And Jackie's end goal was for students to pull out the main idea. So we're gonna watch the same video that she showed her students. It's a short one, so that we can gain context for Jackie's lesson.
This one is talking about fighting ableism. Do you know what ableism is? Think about it. If you had an issue walking into a room because you couldn't reach a door handle, or maybe there's a step and you have a hard time walking, how are you making sure that everyone can walk in the room with ease, with access, equal access, right? So this is about that. The ways in which our bodies may move against the wind or the water, climb stairs, or swing high in a child's park, both arms in flight, all on their own, is different. Sometimes we have sight. Sometimes we have the sense of smell. Sometimes we are working with a different set of skills altogether. There is more than one way to exist. There is more than one way we learn how to speak with our hands or our eyes. There are different tones to evoke a symphony of laughter. Our fingers and toes, our arms and torsos, each courageous cloud, a thunderous declaration, echoing, I am here. Because the smallest things that make us up are the largest strokes of beauty that color us brilliant. But the heart, oh my, how our hearts beat the same.
Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge Liz and her vulnerability here. Thank you for sharing your personal story. Yeah, very powerful, and it stays with you. So thank you, Liz. So before asking her students to engage in this conversation about the author's message, there was a lot of pre-work that she had to do first, because this is complex text. And so she knew that she had to provide scaffolds for her English learners in order for them to access it. So first they just watched the video to really soak in Brown's words and for the enjoyment of it. And then they watched it again, where she stopped throughout for some guided inquiry, talking through the poem so that they can make meaning. The next piece was they posted the poem on this interactive app, but also note that she sent home a hard copy prior to the lesson. So the kids had a hard copy in front of them. And our prompt was to circle the words that you think our class should talk about and gain a better understanding of. As our class creates a common understanding of these words, draw images to represent those. The children had options to find images on the internet too and add them directly to their notes. But during this time, this is where she really worked through the vocabulary and language of the poem, again, to build that comprehension and make meaning. So here's one of a student's notes, magnified for the whole class to see. You could see there they underlined a few words: symphony, courageous, declaration, echoing. The kids underlined, highlighted, they added images to depict what those words meant. They added lines pointing to the actual words. Again, just that brain remembering. And then together they talked through what those words meant. And then some of the kids added some notes onto their own work. Another part of the lesson was to focus on imagery, because figurative language is a part of 6th grade standards. So students watched it again, but this time listened for an ear for imagery. And again, the students took notes. So you can see like a lot of built-up goes in to just this one piece. But this is where she had her students really think about author's point of view. So we're going to watch the video right now of Jackie really engaging with her students. Now, although they're not physically talking with her, I just want you to notice how Jackie expertly narrates everyone's responses, elaborates on them, and pushes their thinking a little more forward.
I want you to make a statement about what is the author trying to teach us with this poem? What statement is she trying to make? You might think of it as a theme, because I know you guys are really good at that, thinking about what the characters learn. But who makes those characters? The author. It's what the author's trying to teach us. What is the author trying to have us learn? Go ahead and type it in the statement so we can see what your thoughts are. I want everyone to say something. Oh, Aiden put people with disabilities. And even the photo he shows, there's tall people, short people. We have people in wheelchairs. We have people with different skin colors, different clothes, different glasses. I love that, Aiden. Aiden, I even want to push you a little bit. If this is about people with disabilities, what does the author want us to learn about people with disabilities? What does she want us to do? What does she want us to learn? What is she trying to teach us about them? Josiah, Emelina, Angel, Fernanda, Johnny, I need you guys typing, not in the chat box, but in the Nearpod thing so that we can all see. Roslyn, wow, look at what Roslyn says. She thinks that the author is trying to teach us that we can all learn the same things, but we learn them in different ways. Man, Roslyn, you make me think about our number talk, right? There is no right way to do it. We could go left, we could go right, we could go all the way around. There's not just one way to do things. And maybe that's what she's trying to teach us, that we learn the same thing, but we learn it in different ways. I love that. Johnny, I love what you said. Johnny kind of added on to what Aiden originally said, right? Because I asked Aiden, it's not just about people with disabilities, right? What does the author want us to learn about them? And Johnny was like, respect them. I like that. That's a great start. I wonder how she wants us to respect them. Hey, Zeus, all people should be equal. I like that, Jesus. I can't wait to hear more about what you think about that. Angel, we can learn anything, but not everyone is thinking the same thing. I love it, Angel. Great addition. Aiden, don't make fun of people with disabilities. Okay, yeah. Tom thinks that the author's trying to teach us not to judge others. And when you think of the word judge, that has a very negative connotation. So I think what he's saying is to not look down upon people, not to look down upon people who are different than us. I like that. Yeah, Ellie, be nice. That's all that's what Mahogany Brown is asking us. I love that, yet Ellie. Be nice, right? The King of Kahoot, aka Gabriel, when she said, Gabriel even went to the text and brought a sentence for us. When she said, "Oh, how our hearts beat the same," Gabriel thought, just because people are different than you doesn't mean that you should make fun of them. Because our hearts beat the same. I love that, Gabe. I love that, Gabe. I love it. Isaac is saying, hey, people are not all the same. People are different. And it's up to us to recognize that. Oh, Sunchips. Sunchips is thinking it's a little bit more about courage, right? The ability to have that courage and do it, right? Be nice, to help them with things. Yeah, Gladys, to help others. Andrea, we might all be different, but we're different in our own ways. Oh, Brissia, I love this one, my friends. Look at Brissia's. Oh, it went away from me. Oh, it says, don't leave people behind. I love that. Don't just be self-aware. Don't just think about yourself. Oh, I can go up these stairs, no problem. You should be conscious of who else is on the bottom of the stairs. Do they need help? Do they need assistance? Don't leave them behind. I love that, my friend. Jonathan, I love that you're bringing up the idea of racism. And I would love in the future for us to get really deep into like, what is that word? Like, what is racist? What does it mean to be racist? It seems that you know it's bad. But how do you do the opposite? How do you become anti-racist? Doesn't matter if your skin color is different. I love it. We're all we're all different, but we're similar in our own ways. Wow, you guys did so good. My friends, that was the last part of our activity today, and you guys did fantastic.
Okay. So many wonderful things going on in this video. Not only do we just love how she genuinely talks with her kids and makes them feel valued with her positive messaging, but she uses literature to teach standards and create a safe space for courageous conversation and inquiry to happen. You can see there that the students' responses were so powerful and in tune of what's going on in the world today. But on the other note, did you also notice the amount of student participation? This is what we mean by those critical conditions around investing relationships, building community, affirming identity, and making learning relevant. Jackie is blown away by what her kids are producing right now and is so excited to hear more as they progress throughout the unit. And as a side note, she also mentioned that she loves having a few recordings so that when she goes back to rewatch them, she just learns so much more about her kids. So thank you, Jackie, for sharing your practice with us. Okay.
I want you to...
We are nearing the end of our webinar today, and it is our hope that a few ideas stood out to you. So we're calling all of our fearless educators here today to reflect and reimagine what school could look like when you prioritize the whole child first. So please take a moment, find a piece of paper or Post-it, and jot down your commitment. You can also do it in the chat if you like. But here's the sentence frame that we've provided for you. You can also use your own. One idea from these practices I would like to try is blank. To do so, my first step would be blank, and I might need help from blank to do this. This school year is challenging and unique, to say the least. So we're circling back to our critical conditions because this is the foundation for our webinar. As you continue throughout this year, think about reimagining the way that you always envision teaching could look like and should look like. It's about investing in relationships and building community. It's about affirming identity and making that learning relevant. In doing so, we acknowledge our students' strengths, their funds of knowledge that they bring from home, and we celebrate their brilliance, resourcefulness, and resilience that allows them to push forward in this unpredictable world. On behalf of ELRISE, we just want to say thank you and give out a huge appreciation for all that you do for our children. We're wishing you all the best for a successful, welcoming, inclusive, and affirmed year.
Thank you, Jenny. I think we're all doing virtual claps. Thank you for your presentation today. You and Ashley did amazing. So I just want to share with you a couple of upcoming offerings. So the first is for our dual language partners. We've offered this series before, but it starts again tomorrow. We have part 1, partnering with families in the first month of dual language programs for our kindergarten and first grade teachers. And we also have part 2, planning biliteracy and distance learning, Spanish dual language programs, kindergarten, first grade, next week. And we noticed at the very beginning of this presentation that we had 100 participant cap. We will be fixing that for next time. So next week, next Wednesday, Jenny and Ashley will be presenting this webinar again. So if you have some colleagues who weren't able to get in this time, they're more than welcome to join us next week. And we'll also be pushing out the resources and video for this webinar as well, that you're more than welcome to forward. Again, we apologize for that. We will be offering critical conditions for English learners in distance learning. So really digging in deeper to some of the instructional pieces around our document on Wednesday, September 16th or Wednesday, September 23rd. And then we are going to be doing another session on creating and sustaining family partnerships in distance learning on September 24th or September 30th. So the bit.ly links should be in the chat. So you're more than welcome to click on those and register. And thank you for your participation today and hanging in there with us. See you, some of you tomorrow, and see some of you maybe the next couple weeks. Have a great evening, everybody. And if you would like, if you want to put some comments in the chat, things that worked for you and or things that you think we might need to improve, we'd really appreciate it. We're going to turn on some music and kind of hang out for a little bit, and then we'll be closing down. Have a great evening, everybody.